My name is Terry Scott, and what I want to do with our less than 2 hours together is three things. One, I want to talk about, well, in general, I want to talk about dealing with kids with regard to behavior, and I want to talk about all kids, but I'm going to have a specific eye toward kids who tend to give us challenges with their behavior. I'm going to talk about what we need to do school-wide, what we need to do in the classroom for instruction, and what we need to do in the classroom for management. A lot of times when I give this talk, people will say, we only want the management part. And we could certainly talk all day about just management, but if we're really going to talk about probabilities for making kids successful, we need to talk about all three. Each one helps the other to work a little bit better. So what I'd like to talk about today is gambling. We're going to gamble. If you work with kids, you're a gambler. You're always trying to figure out the thing that would work. There is no sure thing. Otherwise, it wouldn't be gambling. What we're doing is saying, given that I've got these kids in this room and I want them to do these things, what things could I do to maximize the probability of that happening? And there are a million things you could do. What I want to talk about with our time today is which of those things is the smartest if you really want kids to be successful? What are the things you should do if you want to maximize that probability? So I'm going to start this by talking about schools and what everybody in the school should do. Raise your hand if you've heard of PBIS before. Okay, that's most people. Raise your hand if you are in a school that does PBIS. Looks like a little more than half of people. Okay, so I would like to talk to you about PBIS because I do a lot of work with PBIS and have for over 20 years. One of the things that I have found is that the majority of PBIS schools aren't really doing PBIS. So I would like to just lead you through the simplicity of PBIS. What we're trying to do when we do PBIS is create schools where kids are more likely to be successful across the school. And we do that through a couple of things, relationships and instruction. That's really all PBIS is about. And people have added a million other things to it, which aren't necessary. They don't necessarily mean there's not PBIS. It just means you're doing something that doesn't have to be done for PBIS. Generally, I've found schools think they're doing PBIS if they've got one of two things. One, we have a poster that says PBIS, therefore we're doing PBIS. Not necessarily. And there's nothing about PBIS that requires a poster. Second, we're doing PBIS because we give a lot of goodies away to kids. Okay. That does not make you a PBIS school. You could do that and be a PBIS school, or you could be a PBIS school and not do that. But those aren't things that automatically make PBIS. Let's start with what schools do. This is data on what adults do with kids in schools. And here's why this is important. We know that the more an adult and a student have an interaction in school that ends in a not negative way. We always say positive interactions, but the reality is not negative. The more times that you and I have a back and forth that's not negative, the more I can predict success for you and achievement for you. So we'd like to see more back and forth between kids and students. This is data that we've collected. This is 1,600 observations, elementary, middle, and high school. The red bar is percentage of time adults in common areas spend looking at kids. So I'm in a common area, a hallway, a cafeteria, an entry. Most of the time I'm looking at kids. It's 95 or better. The green bar is what percentage of time am I talking to kids. That's 17 at elementary, 11 at middle, and 2 at high school. This is opportunity lost. We know that you and I having a simple back and forth, how's it going? Good, good. Those simple back and forths that we have create a probability for success. We are not using our opportunities to do that. Now, what people in schools say to me often is, Well, those kids don't want to be engaged. Well, they don't want to do math either. But what our job is to figure out ways to make this happen because it's a probability for success. That's why we need to figure out ways to make it happen. We count it as an engagement if it lasts at least 5 seconds. If it didn't last 5 seconds, we code it as positive, negative, or neutral, and there's very little neutral. These are rates of positive and negative teacher statements in common areas. At elementary school, an adult standing in a common area says something positive about every 5.8 minutes and says something negative about 1.8 minutes. By high school, the average is they say something positive every 4.3 minutes and something negative every 23 seconds. If I'm a kid in this school walking around in common areas, hallways, cafeterias, entryways, lockers, etc., not only is it not engaging, but any back and forth we are having is likely to be negative, which sets the exact opposite in terms of a probability for success. Probability for success goes down as negatives go up. So here's the next thing people say to me. Well, they never do anything right for us to say something right about. One, I totally disagree. I go to schools all the time, and the worst schools I go to, most of the kids are doing what they're supposed to most of the time. But second, if that was true, that your kids are never doing anything right, that's an instructional problem. I mean, if I went to a math class and I said, none of these kids are getting it, then we'd say, then how do we teach it different? You wouldn't just go, nothing I can do. They're all going to fail. Nothing I can do. It always comes back to instruction. So here's the way I want you to think about PBIS. It's a triangle when you see it. It's really 3 triangles, not 1. So I want you to think about that green triangle first. That green triangle represents every kid in the school. Green, just think about it this way, green equals instruction. All right, so here's what we need to do. We need to provide instruction for every kid in the school for what we want them to do. What do you want kids to do in the hallway? Teach that. What do you want them to do in the cafeteria? Teach that. Let me make a distinction for you. A distinction between teaching and telling. If people say, we already taught that. Did you teach it or did you tell them? Or did you do neither and you put it on a piece of paper and posted it on the wall? Would you accept that as good instruction from a reading teacher, a math teacher? Say, what are you teaching this year? Oh, I put it all on posters and put it around the room. I don't have to say anything. You'd say, not good teaching. But that's exactly what we're doing for behavior. So PBIS says, teach it. Teach it like you would teach anything else. So I want you to think about that green there, and I want you to think about not academics and not behavior. I want you to think about health. Let's say that the kids in your school are starting to accumulate rust. Literally, rust. They're corroding. There's a lot of dampness in your school, and these kids are gathering rust and corrosion, and it's making arms just fall right off as they walk down the hall. We need to stop rust. So the first thing we know is what causes rust? Dampness. Get a moisture meter, go around your school and find any area that's damp. And here's what you do with that area. You paint it with green rust-proof paint. Remember what green means? Instruction. All right, so let's paint those areas where we think it needs it more, and that means we need more instruction in those areas. But the reality is every kid needs instruction on everything. So here's what you need to do. Take all your kids, line them up down the hallway, and paint them head to toe with green rust-proof paint. Don't miss any nooks or crannies because rust will get in there if you do. Now, you've used instruction for every kid, plus you've specifically taught in specific areas where this is more important. Now, see how it goes. How will you know if it's working? You're gonna have to look for it. So you're gonna go around the school scratching kids. Talk to them. How's it going? How are you guys? And when you see paint flaking off, you say to yourself, that's a non-responder. That's the word we use. Non-responder. What does non-responder mean? Non-responder means here's a kid that we gave everything to and believed it was enough, and it wasn't enough for that kid. And they're out there. What we do for non-responders is we give them a coating of yellow super rust-proof paint. Now, smart people are thinking, if yellow paint works better than green, why don't we just use yellow right from the get-go? Here's why. Yellow's expensive. 2, yellow paint only protects from rust when it's applied on top of a base of green. So a lot of times people think, oh, well, when green doesn't work, you stop teaching the foundations and you just do something different. It won't work. Green has to be increased, and then yellow is additional things. You don't do something just different, you do something that's different and more. Put it in place. What you're going to find is there are some kids out there in your world who can rust through 2 layers of paint. And they're going to need red. Red is super deluxe rust-proof paint. It only comes in red, but here's the deal with red paint. It's prescription paint, if you think about it. It's kind of weird. You go to Lowe's and say, I want some red paint for... Your one thing is covering the other.
Sorry, Jenna.
Jenna. And the guy at Lowe's is going to say, well, I don't know anything about Jenna. This paint red is really individualized. I need to know how old she is, how well she's reading, what other things are going on in her life, red paint is highly individualized. Now, another way to think about highly individualized is IEP. Yeah, an IEP is red paint, but there are lots of kids who go through 2 layers of paint that don't qualify for special ed. They still get an individualized plan. It's expensive. What we know is the better job we do of green paint, the less yellow and red you'll have. The better job we do with yellow paint, the less red we'll need. That's the logic of PBIS. But we're talking about instruction and individualized programming. Unfortunately, and we've done a lot of this research, and I said this earlier, most of the schools we look at are not doing PBIS to fidelity. And generally a fidelity would say you're doing 80% of the things that we believe PBIS is made up of. But we do know the more schools do of the pieces of PBIS, the less suspensions they have. So what does it mean to be doing PBIS? 4 simple things. 1, predict when and where kids will fail with behavior. I can do this with you really quick and fast. Simple. I'm coming to your school tomorrow. I can only be there for 5 minutes, but I can come at any time of the day. If while I'm at your school tomorrow, I see problem behaviors, every adult in your school gets $10,000. When would you like me to be there, and where would you like me to stand? Now, if you work in a school, you're thinking, you need to be here during lunch. You need to be in the cafeteria. You need to be over by the garbage can. You need to be looking at... Because you work there, you know. That's prediction. You can all predict right now if you work in a school. Box 2, prevention. I'm coming to your school tomorrow. I'll be there at lunchtime. I'll be in the cafeteria. I'll be by the garbage can. If I see no problems, you all get $20,000. What would you like to see happen in your school between now and tomorrow at lunchtime? I'd like to see us talking to the kids about what we want and why that's important and practicing it and thinking about it. And I'd like to think how many adults are in there and what they're supervising. And I'd like to think about how many kids are in one of those places at one time. And that's PBIS. That's all it is. What are we going to teach the kids, and what are we going to do to create a high probability? Box 3 is just, how do you get a bunch of adults to do that? Because if it's not consistent, it won't work. Instruction that's inconsistent doesn't work. If I said, we as a school are teaching 2 plus 2 this year, and the answer's 4. And then we've got a bunch of teachers that go, I'm not a math teacher, it's going to be 5 or 3 in my room, I don't care. If you got a bunch of teachers telling kids that 2 plus 2 is 5 or 3, it's going to screw it up. Same logic. We want kids to walk in the hall, and there's a bunch of teachers, I don't care. Well, then you don't really have a rule. And if you don't have a consistent rule, instruction won't work. So we have to figure out what those are. Then we've got to know if it's working so we can decide whether to keep doing it or not. Let's start with prediction. Here's a simple way to do prediction. This is a map of a real school, an elementary school. I gave every adult working in this school 2 dots. Colors are irrelevant. I said, I want you to think about the behaviors that you deal with most in this school, not in the classroom, other than the classroom. I want you to write down the name of that problem, and I want you to write the time of day you think you see it most often. Everybody done that? Good. Now, up here is a map. When I say go, I want you to run up and stick it on the place on the map that you were thinking of when you wrote that dot. Everybody does that? We do not need to spend a lot of time talking about the courtyard. We do need to spend a lot of time talking about the cafeteria. That's where everybody agrees we've got problems. So we know where, we know when, and we know what, because those are all on the dots. Lunchtime, manners, messes, and loud. Those are the 3 things you see on those dots. Okay? Now we can ask, what would you like the kids to do? What will we teach? Where will we stand? How many can be there at one time? How many supervisors will it take? Do we need to assign seats? All of those are things we can do based upon that information. What we're going to do is translate that information into a summary. In this place, at this time, with these kids, we have these problems, and we believe those problems are there because, and people are pretty good at this part, why do you think that's happening with those kids in that place at that time? Oh, we don't have enough instruction. Nobody told them. Or we've got every adult has a different idea. Or there's too many kids in there. Or there's no adults in there. Those are all the kinds of things we want to know. So we can take that and turn it into an intervention. What do you want the kids to do? This is from a high school. Part of their problem, this is a hallway. Part of their problem in the hallway was kids running and kids not moving at all. So they've got walk, appropriate language, hands, feet to self, keep moving. 4 things we want the kids to do. But the adults are also going to do something. And the thing we've asked is, the adult part should be bigger than the kid part, or at least as big. So the adults have agreed to 6 things. We didn't tell them to do this. This is an agreement that the schools make with a discussion. We want 4 kid behaviors. We're going to stand in our doorway as much as we can. Give kids reminders before they leave the room. Keep a door open in the stairway so we can look into it. Have an adult that walks that area during break time. Acknowledge kids that are doing it right. Correct kids that are doing it wrong. We all made these agreements. The important thing is, 1, we agreed to a bunch of things we're going to do. But 2, we're doing more than them. And before we used to say, why don't you have more than the kids? We'd have people that come back and go, we now have 82 rules for the cafeteria. Like nobody's going to remember more than 3 or 4 of them. So if we can keep it under 5 and keep yours at 5 or 6, we get our best possible outcomes thinking of it that way. Now what about the rules? If you've got 5 rules for every location in your school, you probably got at least 30 rules. And that becomes a problem. You probably have more than that. What you need to do is consider effective instruction. This is what PBIS was built for. You know that poster that everybody in PBIS schools has that says something, big ideas that's in their front hall? There was a reason for that, and it's not prettiness, is not why that was put in place. When we teach reading, we don't teach every word in the dictionary. When we teach math, we don't teach every math problem you could ever see. We teach concepts that allow people to solve. Same for behavior. What are the concepts? And those concepts are things we call anchors or big ideas. Here's the logic. Anchors are folders in your long-term memory. Your long-term memory has all the knowledge you have, but it's organized. So if you get a flat tire, your working memory goes up to your long-term memory and finds the flat tire folder and opens it. And inside the flat tire folder are a bunch of subfolders. Hey, here's one for a crank jack. Here's one for a pump jack. Many of us, the only thing in our folder is AAA. But you still know where to go and there's something to solve. That's because it was organized that way when you learned it. If you want kids to remember all these little rules, they're going to have to be organized. And anchors or big ideas is how we do that. So the idea in PBIS that you would teach something like respect people. What does that mean? It means treat people the way you want them to treat you. That's the rule we teach. That's the rule we go over, we make sure everybody has. Now here's what we do with that. What does respect others mean? That's right. So what should we be thinking about when we're in the hallway? Now what I'm doing is I've built a folder, respect. Inside that respect folder is a hallway folder. And inside the hallway folder is a list of things we do. Now you're going to need to teach very specific examples. What if someone's being disrespectful to you? How are you disrespectful? And this is what teachers have to do, is think out what are the examples for the kids to get it. And you're adding examples to their folder. But if we haven't organized it for them, it's just random stuff. It'll be lost in 30 seconds. So I just come out to you guys and say, quiet in the hall. You know what she's thinking right now? That power-hungry teacher just gave me some arbitrary things just so he could make me do something. Why would I be quiet? There's no need to be quiet. And so she just, I'm not going to, and it's gone in 30 seconds. Well, there was a reason to be quiet, but I didn't anchor it for her. I didn't say, what's it mean to be respectful of others? And so why would we need to be quiet in the hall? It was never taught to her that way, so it's gone. That long-term memory is like the hard drive on your computer. What if I told you you're no longer allowed to use any folders on your hard drive? None. Every document must be sitting on your desktop. And many of you have 20,000 documents now sitting stacked on your desktop. And I say this to you. Remember that thing you wrote 3 years ago? I forget the title. I need it. Okay. She doesn't know where it is. She's not even sure what I'm talking about. How long will she search 20,000 documents before she decides that if she flipped me off, maybe I'd ask her to leave? That's what's happening. She doesn't have it. It's buried. It's gone because it was never organized in there in the first place. What we have to do is create the folders, and that's why we have the rules attached to big ideas like be safe, be responsible, be courteous, or respect yourself, respect others, respect property. That's the reason for having those in PBIS. Effective instruction. When we anchor things, we give them a place to sit, and it's easier to find them when we need them. We ask schools to build this matrix that's a curriculum. What do you want kids to do? Be ready, be respectful, be responsible. What's that look like in the hallway, in the cafeteria, in the playground? Don't put this on the wall because the kids don't care. This is what we all agreed on. This is our curriculum. I don't know why that changed on its own, but next thing to think about is reinforcement. When I say, hey, let's reinforce kids, unfortunately everybody in schools thinks I'm saying, buy candy and give it to people. That's not what we're talking about here. And this is a sign I found on the internet. I don't know where it came from. But if someone says to me, what do you mean by reinforcement in schools? Hey, I noticed you doing that right. That's reinforcement. That's all we need. If you could get all the adults in your school to do that, it would work really well. But we know adults don't do this, even when we ask them to, and even we encourage them to, and it just doesn't happen very well. So what do we do instead? Well, we'd like to see tons of verbals, but if you wanted to do more than verbal, you still don't need to spend money. How about access to privileges that are curricular based? Here's an example. She's had a great morning. First time she's had a whole morning without any problems. We're now going to the computer lab. Everybody always argues over who gets first pick on the 20 identical computers. Here's what I do because she's had a good morning. Caitlin, you've had a great morning. Tell you what, why don't you take first pick on computer? That is not really an extra privilege because it was going to happen anyway. But I can take a lot of things that happen during the day and spin them and use them like that. It's free, and it's a whole nother layer. But it only really makes a difference if I say it. If there's some way for her to do that without me having this interaction, you had a great morning. Why don't you? It's this interaction that makes that work. Third, public acknowledgement, certificates, pictures, announcements. What would your kids like? A lot of kids don't want to be called out in the classroom. Look at Caitlin, she's awesome. That's teacher's pet thing, I don't want that. But a letter home to mom, signing the wall of fame, all these other kinds of things you can do with public acknowledgement that are simple, free. Tickets and tokens, most schools that do PBIS use those, and that's fine. However, they're not going to work any better than those other things. In fact, I really believe the data suggests to us that if you cranked up the level of verbal praise really high, you wouldn't need anything else. But we don't. And so why do we end up with tickets and tokens? Because nobody does the other stuff. That's why. I don't have a philosophical problem with tickets and tokens. I have a practical problem. It's a lot more work. It would be easier just to go, thanks, but we don't. And so I think sometimes the tickets work because they simply remind adults to say something. Although if you're handing out the tickets without saying anything, you've blown the whole purpose. And I see people do this. You've missed your opportunity to say, here's what you did right and why I'm proud and why you should be proud. That's what the ticket should give you, is this opportunity to have an interaction. And again, if you're not having the interaction, you've really missed the point of what those things should be. We're going to take track of what is going on in the school so we can figure out what is working and what's not working. And what we want to do is we want to give all those things back to the whole school. So I like to post that data by the mailboxes or by the staff room or wherever people will see it. This is what we're doing. This is why it's working. So here's what I'd like you to do. On each of these three sections, I'm going to be real specific. I would like you just to spend a few minutes with the people around you talking about, do you have something like this in your school, or are you a PBIS school? If you are, where do you need to tweak? If you're not, you don't need to say, we're going to be a PBIS school. You can do the same logic without technically being a PBIS school, but ask yourself, why does this keep going on without me? Ask yourself, what is there to do in my school that we could do simply this year? So I'd like you just to take a few minutes and kind of talk through that, and then I'm going to jump us into the instruction part next. Okay, I'm going to bring you back. And as we talk about instruction, which is next, I want to make the bet a little bit more explicit with you. So here, I want you to think about it like this. I have all of your money. I have your checking. I have your savings. I have your car. I have all the equity in your house. I have your retirement. I have your cash. You have nothing. I've taken everything you own, and I'm going to bet it. You could either double it or you could lose it all. Here's the bet. Inside this doorway over here, I have a classroom filled with middle school kids. Right here, I have a brand new teacher, just graduated. This is my plan. I open the door to the middle school classroom, I throw that teacher in, I shut the door and lock it for a week. We're betting on what happens in that room. Here's what I'm going to bet your money on. Pretend like we're in the sports book at a casino. We're not watching football, we're watching videos of that classroom. If the kids in that room are on task 80% of the time, that's all, but nobody is removed, tossed out of that, you've doubled your life savings in 1 week. If either one of those things does not happen, you've lost it all. The stakes are incredibly high for you. If it were that important, what would you like to see that teacher doing in that classroom? That's a lot of things to think about. You've got 5 minutes before we put him or her in there and shut the door and lock it. There's no way you're going to be able to go through what is effective instruction and effective management and effective relationships and all that in 5 minutes. Probably it's easier to think of what are the things you don't want that teacher to do and talk about those. But there's your probabilities. It's gambling. Some things work better than others. There are things you'd want and things you don't want because you know what those probabilities look like, or believe you do. Here's one more thing. Even if that teacher is really good at managing behavior, managing classrooms, managing instruction, there's going to be a kid that's going to make it hard. That kid. You all know that kid. He or she may not look just like that, but you know exactly who I'm talking about. It works for everyone but him. So however good this teacher is, he or she's also got to be good at dealing with individual kids, or you're going to lose your money. Now that I think about it, this isn't really that good a bet for you. I apologize. But we've already made the bet, so there's nothing we can do. All we can do now is hope that teacher does the right things. What are the right things? We know what they are. That doesn't mean there isn't something better, but as of right now, of the things you could choose from, we know what those probabilities are. A are the kids in your room. They're unique, as all kids are. C is what do you want them to do? I want them to say 4 when we say 2 plus 2. I want them to be able to give me the main idea from a passage. I want them to handle a conflict without hitting anybody. That's your curriculum. Here's a question. What should we do to get there? And I don't like that question because I think the answer to that question is pretty much everything a teacher could possibly do might make that more likely. So let's change the question. That P means probability. Instead of saying, what could we do to affect that? This is what we should be asking. What could we do to maximize the probability of a success right there? Here's the answer. We know it. This set of things gives us the highest effect size of anything we could possibly do. Anything. My area is, I'm in special ed, my area is children with emotional and behavioral disorders. This set of practices right here, when used together, have a bigger effect size than medication. That doesn't mean there aren't kids out there that need medication. What it means is, we shouldn't be giving medication to anybody who isn't already getting this first, because this is our best chance. To do something with a less probability without doing that is just dumb. I mean, you're going to win your bet if there's a success. This stuff works this well, this next thing works this well. If your money was riding on it, why would you take this one when we've got this one? And that's a lot of what we're talking about in terms of probability, is using the things that we know give us our best chance. One, be explicit. Explicit means telling them, but it's way more than that. It means contextualizing it for them. So if it's walk in the hall, being explicit means, what does walking mean? And this is what walking in the hall looks like. But it also is why. How does this connect to other things we've talked about? What are some good examples of this in your life? Where will this lead you? Why is this important for you? All of that's part of being explicit. Second, show and tell. Model and demonstrate with them. And third, engage them. And you can't do 1 and 2 well unless you're doing 3 at the same time. Engaging has to happen throughout all of what we do, or we're not going to get our maximized effects. Set goals. Give kids feedback on their progress toward goals. Be consistent with what you do and what you teach. Guide practice. Don't say, okay, now I showed you, go do it. Say, what will you do next? What would be the first part? Show me that first part. How will you do that? Remember to do this. Guide them into being successful. We used to call that scaffolding at one point in time. Be proximal. Move around, look at, and talk to all the kids. Space your practice out. If you think it's going to take 100 repetitions for this kid to get it, doing 100 in 1 day is not going to work very well. Do 5 a day for 20 days. The idea here is when you know you want repetition, the more you try to bulk it up and mass it in one time, the lower effect you'll have. And think of it logically. Hey, you finally did that math problem correct. Why don't you do the next 1,000 in your book right now? After 10, she's not liking this math so much. And after 50, she hates me. And after 70, she's going to drop out of school. And it has a negative effect when it becomes a punishment to do the work. I'd rather have her do 5 every day and go, wow, I'm so impressed. You're so good at this. And then do it again the next day. That's the difference between spacing and massing. The effect size is enormous to do it the right way. We want assessment to happen all the time, and we want success to happen more than failure. If what you're doing with instruction doesn't set kids up to be successful more than they fail, it's not working. How much more? Well, we can guess, because it depends on the kid. For the average kid, being successful 4 times more often than you fail is a great predictor for future success. For kids who have had a lot of failure in their life, 4 to 1's not enough. For kids that are about a standard deviation below, 14 to 1 is more like what it takes. So 4 to 1 you can think of as what you do to prevent having to get 14 to 1. Because if 4 to 1 doesn't work and you can't make it work, you're going to end up behind the ball on this one, having to do things that are super hard to do. So we're going to talk about instruction, but instruction and classroom management go together. The reason we do instruction is to make kids successful. The reason we do management is to make instruction work better to make them successful. The more we do a good job with management, the better instruction will work, and the more we do well with instruction, the less we'll need the management. They can't be divorced from one another. They are both necessary. So, your money's riding on it. What do you want instruction to look like? Here's what the research says. It's 3 things. 1, to what degree are you, the teacher, actively driving the lesson? You've taken control of it to make sure that the examples are happening and that the kids are looking at these things and that they're tying them back to their real life, and the teacher drives that. They're up and doing that. Second, the teacher takes responsibility for making sure the kids are engaged. We do that in a variety of ways. One of the ways we do that is called with opportunities to respond, or OTRs. Raise your hand if you know what OTR stands for. OTR stands for opportunity to respond. Raise your hand if you know what OTR stands for. Turn to your neighbor and tell them what OTR stands for. Okay, everybody, don't really do this. Write OTR on a paper and hold it up. Okay, if I had you do those, I just gave you like 4 OTRs in 20 seconds. That's what we're looking for. You don't need to do that many, but that's what we're looking for. What are all the ways you could engage kids? I could ask you to say something. I could ask you to tell somebody. I could ask you to draw it. I could ask you to hold it up. We could ask you to raise your hand. All of those are engagement. Third, how many times did the teacher say something positive or gesture something positive to a kid? Those three things. Those three things give you a bigger effect size for kids' behavior change in a positive direction than any other way of teaching. John Hattie, who looks at these things empirically with meta-analyses, calls that direct instruction. I don't really think, in my mind, that's not what I'd call direct instruction, but it doesn't really matter what we call it. I call it effective instruction. So the question really isn't, hey, is an effect size of 0.59 good? I don't know. Here's a better question. Is there anything better? That's the question we have to ask, and the answer is, as of right now, nothing you could do in terms of teaching behavior to kids gives you a better chance of them getting it and keeping it than using those three things. So here's what we did. I have a center called the Center for Instructional and Behavior Research in Schools. About 10 years ago, I developed a little tool that we use for assessing teaching. So we go into classrooms and we sit in the back, and on this little handheld we have a lot of little codes for OTRs and positive feedback and negative feedback and everything teachers do. We also pick a kid at random. Kind of close my eyes and say, when I walk in the room, I'll take the third kid I see. And we code what that kid gets. Now we've done this over 13,000 times, and I can tell you what the average kid gets in a classroom, and I can tell you what the average teacher does in a classroom. And I can break it out for you by elementary, middle, high. I can break it out by reading, math, science, or social studies, and I can break it out by ethnicity and gender. And there's some interesting things in there. So let me show you one of the things that we found. We have three codes that are similar to John Hattie's three big things. First one, once we start our code, and we only watch instruction, by the way. If they're taking roll or transition, we're waiting. If they start into practice, we don't code it. We only code instruction. So we never code longer than 15 minutes, and if the teacher stops before 15 minutes is up and starts practice, we stop. So, we have one code that is, what percentage of the time we were watching was the teacher actively teaching? In order to be actively teaching, they have to be doing something with kids and curriculum. Writing on the board counts as active teaching. Walking around the room talking to kids counts as active teaching. Simply standing there while the kids all do something doesn't. Second, we count how many OTRs they've used. You all know what OTRs are because I just bugged you about it a few minutes ago. How many times did they give the kids a chance to do or say something inside the curriculum? And three, how many times did they say or gesture something positive? We did thousands of these observations. We asked statistically, how many unique clusters of teacher are there in the world? And what we found is interesting. You rarely see a teacher that does one of those things or two. They usually do all three at a high rate, at a medium rate, or a low rate. Three kinds of teacher, high, medium, low. Now you can do a prediction. What could you predict about kid behaviors knowing that a teacher did these at high, medium, or low? And here's what we found. If I go watch a teacher teach for 10 minutes during the time they're delivering instruction, if they're using those three things in the lower third of all teachers, the kids in that classroom are 27% more likely to be off task and a huge 67% more likely to have a disruptive behavior while we're there. And we thought, that's gigantic. There's got to be a mediator in here. So we modeled this with class size, school size, mobility rate, English proficiency rate. I mean, you name everything you can think, none of it changed it at all. So here's what we know right now. And this is our data, but other people are finding the same things all over the place. Right now, if you wanted to predict kid behavior in a classroom, nothing comes close to predicting it as well as teacher instruction, or lack thereof. Race, not a predictor in any way, shape, or form. Poverty doesn't predict it. Teachers predict it. And we find this over and over. So I would like to do a little activity with you where I do some instruction. I'm going to teach you something new today. It's called OSH. First of all, the name of my class is Colorful Geometry. OSH is a geometric shape or shapes of some particular characteristic or characteristics, which is vague on purpose. Now, what would be helpful, I think, is if I told you right now what OSH was and why it was important and why you needed to know it, how it connected to your life. But this is what I keep hearing when I talk to people about effective instruction. You're robbing those kids of their discoveries. So what do you mean? If you just tell them what it is and they don't get a chance to play with it and pull out meaning on their own, it doesn't work as well. And I say, what do you mean doesn't work as well? Oh, it's better instruction if they can figure it out on their own. And I say again, in what way? And nobody ever has an answer because there isn't one. There is no evidence out there that says if you can make them figure it out on their own, it will work better. I believe there are a lot of kids out there that come from families that support education and work hard with their kids, and these kids are fed well and don't have other problems, and they probably would really like to work on something and discover it on their own. But I also think most of our kids are not like that, and if they don't get some explicit instruction, they're probably not going to get it. But let's play that up. Let's play the discovery angle up. I'm not going to tell you what this is because I don't want to rob you of any experiences here today. Instead, I'm going to take you on a field trip where we look at natural examples of OSH. There's number one. What might the definition of OSH be? Could it be a green triangle? Could be. Could it be a green triangle, but only if it's inside of a blue rectangle? Could be. Could it just be a blue rectangle and nothing else? Could be. And you can see there's a million examples of possibilities here. What you'd like is a definition. Again, I'm not going to rob you of your chance to discover. So let's take a field trip and we walk across the field. Look, there's another one. What'd you learn? Here's what I think you should have learned. I don't know if triangles are important, but if they are, they don't have to be on top of the blue. Keep walking. Let's find another example. Here's one more. What'd you learn? I don't think this is a teaching example. A lot of examples aren't teaching examples, and the real world is filled with examples that don't teach anything. Which means you're looking at this and trying to figure something out. For kids especially, kids with disabilities, but a whole range of kids, they'll either not know and feel really bad about themselves, or they'll come up with a misrule, which will set them up for failure later. And I'm going to show you that right now. We come back to the classroom and I say, let's practice. We had the fun field trip. You got to see different OSH. Raise your hand if you think this one's OSH. Somebody has to give me some. Thank you. One person thinks it's all right too. Yeah, now after someone else raised their hand, you're willing. Let's see. It is OSH. Jenna, great job. Stand up and tell everybody how you knew this was OSH.
I saw the green triangle and the blue rectangle.
Okay, what part of it makes it OSH?
The two pieces together.
Sit down, Jenna. I apologize that Jenna's way off base on this, and I think she's just being a smartass, I'm not sure. But I'm going to give her some specific feedback. Not even close, wrong. Okay, so let's do more practice. Raise your hand if you think this one's Osh. Never fails. After I completely humiliate and punish a person for getting it wrong, nobody else is raising their hand. There are people out here thinking, I think it is, but no way am I raising my hand. Because I just made it aversive to be a part of this. I can't control whether someone gets it right or wrong. I can create probabilities for people getting it right or wrong, and I've not created a high probability for right. This one is Osh. Nice job, Brainiacs. It was the same thing. All right, so if this is how far we've gone, and I say, well, we went out and we looked in the natural world and saw examples, and we came back and we practiced with feedback. Let's have a test. How well will you guys do on the test? I'll tell you this right now. If you all fail, it's not my fault because we did all kinds of teaching on this. But it wasn't effective instruction. Let's do this again, but keep a couple things in mind. The real world has all the examples you need to teach, but the real world isn't a teacher. It throws examples out there haphazardly and randomly, and they're not always teaching what we think. And sometimes people say, well, as long as they're natural, it works. No, a teacher has to think out which examples teach. If I said to you, I want to teach you what a dog is, but I'm only going to teach you about dogs that happen in the natural world. Let's go to my neighborhood and go for a walk. If every dog in my neighborhood is a black lab, do you know what a dog is? They were all natural examples, but a teacher didn't stop and think out, this example isn't teaching anything anymore. We need a different example. That's what teachers have to do. To drive instruction, to be explicit, you have to pick out the right examples. Let's do this again. I'm not going to tell you what Osh is, even though that would be effective instruction, because I want to show you the power of thinking out examples. Start here. I happen to know this next example doesn't appear in nature around here, so I had to order one off the internet in order for you to see it. If I were really talking to you about Osh, we would be talking right now about why those are both Osh. What the rule is and what makes them both Osh. You can already see there's one thing in common across two of them. Let me show you another example that's really different, but still has Osh in it. You know what really makes you get it? A non-example. When you teach, whether you're teaching behavior, reading, or math, you want to say, here's the rule. And then you want to say, see this one, it's really different, but it's got the rule. Here's one that's 1,000,000 times different than that, but it still has the rule. Here's one that's crazy different, but it has the rule. And then you want to say, take just the rule away. Change one thing to make it not. Now, I haven't told you what it is, but I thought out, what do I have to do to make my instruction explicit? And explicit doesn't only mean saying it. What's missing is saying it right now and making connections for you. But the examples themselves do a lot of this. So let's practice. Oh, it's got yellow in it. Raise your hand if you think it's Osh. Jenna, I'm nervous. Let's see. It is. Can you tell us why?
Because there was a red rectangle.
A red rectangle is exactly the definition. Great job, Jenna. Remind me to tell your mom what a great job you're doing in here. Maybe you should be in my AP colorful geometry class. You're really good at this. This little back and forth that's really positive was created by effective instruction. Every time I create a success like that for a kid is an opportunity for us to continue having that positive. And that's what I'm trying to create with it from the beginning. That one has an orange border because it's confused people earlier today. Is this one Osh? No, nobody thinks it is. I was thinking it was, and then I remembered it's got to be red and rectangle. Good job. How long do I need to do this with you guys? I need to do this until I believe that when you go do it on your own, you're not going to have any problems. This is project-based learning in my class, so every day when I get done with this instruction, you go back to your project and use what you've learned to keep working on this project. You know what? I think there's something coming up in your project today that's going to screw this up for you. Prevention. That's always what I'm thinking. Pretend my phone has pointy corners. It's a rectangle. Here's what I want you to think. Is it still a rectangle? Is it still a rectangle? Yeah, it doesn't matter the orientation as long as it's got those 4 90-degree angles, 4 sides. And if it's red, it's OSH. So tell you what, I don't want you to say anything, I just want you to think. If today in your project something like this came up, what should we do? Turn to your neighbor and tell them what you think about this. Raise your hand if you and your neighbor agree that this is OSH. Yeah, I agree it is too. It doesn't matter the orientation. So let's go work on your project. This is the same logic as saying, let's pre-teach vocabulary before we read a story where they don't know the words. All I'm doing is thinking ahead. Where might you fail, and what could I do to set you up to be successful and give you the credit? That's the definition of being a teacher. We set traps, we play tricks, we say things, we show things, we do weird things to make it more likely that kids are successful, and then we give them the credit for it. Hey, I've dug this hole right here and put success at the bottom, and when that kid walks by, I trip them and they fall and land right in that hole. And then I say, nice going. I'm giving them the credit. I go home at night, pour a drink, and say, I'm a great teacher. And tomorrow I go back to school and I give it all back to the kids again. That's what teaching is. Making kids believe they did it. Making them believe that it wasn't the teacher, it was them. What we do know, though, is that when kids are highly successful, they report that they like their teacher more and they think their teacher likes them more. It's all about success. That's our great big thing. The more success we create, the better it works. Now, what we want to do here is set kids up to say the right thing, but it isn't always going to work. It's a probability. Engagement, though, is our biggie. So here's a quick study to just think about. I looked for high-poverty Title I schools in Kentucky with distinguished reading scores on the state assessment. There are not very many. I sent people out to all 11 of those schools, and they sat in every single classroom and coded what the teacher does. I then matched a sample of 11 needs improvement in reading schools that were the same demographics, including Title I. And we watched every classroom in every one of those schools. When we did our analysis, what we found was group OTR means opportunities to respond given to the whole group, was the only significant factor. And here's how big it is. In the average high-achieving school, so high-achieving and low-achieving poverty schools, in the average high-achieving poverty school, every week, the average kid gets more than 260 extra chances to respond to instruction. There's the difference between the highest and the lowest. It's the only thing different. Extremely significant, one thing. So when you think about engagement, again, the science is, how do we engage kids? We need to engage kids. The art is, what will your kids need? So I might be able to really engage this early childhood classroom, but using that same strategy is not going to engage the kids in the lockdown. Engagement's the science across both. How we engage is the art of being a teacher and knowing your kids and finding ways to get it across to them. And that's a really hard thing to do. And I think it takes a personality and it takes a lot of other things that make teachers be good. This is what the data say about how often people do these. We'd like to see 3 per minute during instruction because that's what gives you an effect. We get nothing like that. The best we get is at elementary at about 0.8 per minute. How many of you in your teacher ed program learned all about OTRs and how to use them? Yeah, me either. I don't know why, because this isn't a new concept. Now, we may be more recently, within the last 10 to 15 years, we've got more data that says how much and how to use them for different populations, but we've got a lot of that data and it's really strong. Why aren't we talking about this? So often, I didn't think about this. I don't know if I even engaged kids well or not when I was teaching, but often I'll go out to a classroom and I'll say, I'm going to really crank up the OTRs for this class today. And I can crank them way up for like 5-10 minutes and then I forget about it and it just fades away because I'm not practiced either. But what if you'd learned this from early in your program and you were practicing this all through your program, and when you did your practicum and student teaching you were practiced with it and then you practiced it all the time? That's the way we should be doing this. We've got this thing that we know is huge. One of the biggest things we know of in all of education, and it's not something we've spent any time focused on. The same idea goes for the next one, which is the acknowledgement piece. We know that simply using OTRs and then acknowledging kids when they answer, those two things alone are significant negative predictors of suspension. The more teachers in a school use those, the less likely we are to have suspensions. They're also predictors of proficient and distinguished percentage of the whole school in math and reading. So again, it's hard to overstate how impactful these basic things are. But again, we don't use them. These are feedback rates. We said, remember, for the average kid, we'd like 4-to-1. The best we really get is 3-to-1, but it doesn't even matter what the ratio is because the frequencies are so low. We're talking about kids hearing something positive every 7 minutes, going to every 10, going to every 20. It's not enough to predict anything. So when I say this, I hear the same old thing again. Well, the kids don't ever do anything right. A, yes they do. B, if they don't, then it's an instructional problem that you need to fix. And the other thing I hear is, well, we're worried about being too positive. We don't want to go overboard. I never understand that one. What would it look like to be too positive in a school? Our school got too positive. It was horrible. You should have seen it. Everybody was just, I don't know what that would look like. Second, we're in no jeopardy of that happening. We should be just talking about saying things to kids more often because we're not doing it and we know it has an effect. If you know anything about effect size, the effect size of saying thank you, good job to kids is 0.73. That's 3/4 of a standard deviation difference for saying thank you. And we don't do it. That's part of our problem. So I would like you to take a few minutes. I'm going to give you just a very few so we have enough time to finish what we need to, and think about effective instruction in the school where you work and in your classroom, and what of this means something for you and what you might do with it. Take a few minutes and then we're going to finish off with the classroom part. The last piece is really going to be on environment, which classroom management is. When you think classroom management, we would think first, what do you want the kids to do? And how do we teach them to do that? And how do we supervise? And how do we, all of that we've kind of already talked about, so I'm really going to just focus on the physical environment with this last part. So I want to start the physical environment with a discussion of things we can control. You don't control everything about the schedule, but you do control some of the things about the schedule, especially at the classroom level. So here's what to think. The more you can do the same things in the same way, in the same order on a daily basis, the better in terms of predicting kid behavior. Not every kid needs total consistency to make it work, but no one's harmed by it. And if you're talking about kids with autism, especially, but other kids with other disabilities, including behavior disorders, consistency becomes an even bigger predictor for success. So I think you need to think about how to be consistent in your room that works for all your kids. And a lot of times what that means is you need to be as consistent for your classroom as the kid in your classroom who needs the most consistency, because it's just a logical way to think about it. Think about when you have consistency, predictability for kids. So here's something that I learned. My first job ever as a teacher. So I was alternative certified in special ed and thought I was going to go work in a real pretty little school in a pretty little resource room. And I got hired in the lockdown facility, and I had 8 15 to 17-year-old boys in my room adjudicated. And one thing I learned was that if they think you're making up what we're going to do as you go, it's negotiable or arguable. So if I were to say, let's see, what should we do next? How about math? That's an argument. Nope, we're not doing that. And there'd be a big. I learned this. Do it the same way, put it on the board. It's not my idea, it's the schedule's idea. Hey, it's 9:40. That means math. Oh, I know, I don't want to either, but it's 9:40. There's nothing we can do. And what I found was 17-year-old angry kids would go, damn that schedule, and they'd get out their math book. We're all in this together. The schedule dictates. But what they liked about the schedule was it was the same. It tells us when we start. It tells us when we stop. It tells us what we're doing. It's the same. You can predict it. And predictability makes people comfortable. All of us. Go to a meeting. That's horrible enough. Go to a meeting without an agenda. It's just people rambling on. And all I can think the whole time is, if you'd shut up, we could leave. I find it very aversive. I love that agenda. And I know it's like a security blanket, but checking those things off just makes me feel good. That's the same logic. Some control. You feel like you've got some control when you can see where we're going. That's that. Put it on the board, make it obvious, talk about it on a regular basis. Second, there should be expectations for every point on that schedule. When we get ready to transition for lunch, we do this and this. When we go to independent work time, we're supposed to do this and this. I think it should start when you walk in the door. When I cross the threshold into that classroom, I know that I'm supposed to use an inside voice, go to my desk, sit down, get out a paper. Teach kids an expectation for everything. You remember this in elementary school. When you're done with that, you can do this or this. We all had the teacher say that. That's an expectation. It's delivered as a choice, but it's to be successful, these are the things you can choose from. That's an expectation. Because of my background in schools, I find this like nails on a chalkboard to hear this from a teacher. And when you're done, find something to do. Now, your kids might do fine with that. Mine would not have. They would have found something to do. So I don't give them that carte blanche. I create the expectations, but you got to know your kids. Maybe your kids would be fine with choose your own. But you have to keep thinking about those expectations. Next, let's gamble again. What's the over-under? Number of minutes your kids could read silently before somebody does something horrible. 3? Is it? Don't go 3, then, would be what we do. And this is what people say. But my silent reading period lasts a half an hour. Well, then don't do that. We have to. It's a state law that you have to do 25 to 30 minutes of independent silent reading. But that doesn't work for you. If your kids can't go more than 3, then I'd go 2. And I'd stop them and go, what are you reading? That sounds interesting. Anybody else ever read that? What are you reading? How many people in here raise your hand if you just read something about, and I engage them heavily, and then I go back to reading. I can't wait to hear what's happened next. Give them 2 minutes and bring them back. I've had people say to me, no, we can't do it that way. What do you mean you can't do it that way? We have to do the whole half hour. So what you're saying is there's a rule in your school that even if there's going to be a horrible murderous riot, we have to do this anyway. That's just dumb. You have to make your schedule work for you, not you work for your schedule. Create a schedule that you can predict success with. If you can't, it's just dumb to keep trying to do that. What we want to think about is creating a schedule that makes kids more successful. Anything that's going to be different, you're going to have to talk about ahead of time and explain clearly to kids. Next, physical arrangements. Proximity, we talk about a lot. So if I'm going to have proximity with everybody in this room, I'm going to have to walk this whole room. This would be a horrible room to teach in. Or I'd make you all sit in a different place toward the front. This is a lot of walking for me to do to maintain proximity, and I got stuff to do up here. You know, another way to maintain proximity is eye contact. I don't mean me looking at you, I mean our eyes meeting. Eye contact is great proximity. Wherever you go, whatever you do, make sure that you can maintain eye contact. So this is something I learned. I have a feeling that Jenna is always thinking of something negative to do, and she's waiting for a chance. So in my classrooms, I still to this day have this inability to walk a straight line. I'm not comfortable. Because I'm thinking if I'm walking back there and Jenna wants to do something negative, you know what she's thinking? Now! And now she's got all of this time to do that. So I have developed this paranoia from my years in lockdown that when you walk around a room, you randomly twist and spin. I call this the 1 second rule. I want every kid here to believe that within 1 second they might be seen. So when I go by Jenna, then I stop and I talk over here. Saw you out of the corner of my eye, Jenna. How are you guys doing? I can see you out of the corner of my eye again, Jenna. Look at this table. I really like this way. This thing is good. And now if Jenna's thinking, when can I get away with it? She's thinking, I can't. You never know. He could be back here in less than a second. I might even be standing right here and I'm not looking at Jenna. And it's been more than a second, but if she made even the slightest noise, I could be on it. I want every kid to think I have less than a second to get away with anything, because that really makes it likely that they won't try. Will you have kids that'll try anyway? Of course. That's the world. We're working with probabilities here. So I'm constantly thinking, how do I create success with this as I go? So I'm going right back to Jenna with this one. Jenna really hasn't been paying attention to what I've been saying so far this afternoon, because all Jenna can think about is slugging Erin in the ear. She could reach her from there and easily swack her. And I think we could agree that would be fairly funny. The only reason she hasn't done it, I haven't given her an opportunity, which allows me to do this. You are really working hard on Hands to Self, Erin. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Remind me to tell your mom you're working really hard on this. Really impressed. Now, those of you who know Jenna are going, come on. You're reinforcing her for not hitting her, and you know for a fact she would if you gave her a chance. Right, but remember what teachers do? They set traps. They get kids to be successful. They give the kids all the credit. What I'm doing is something within a concept that we call behavior momentum. This is what the science tells us about behavior momentum. The more times you can get somebody to do what you want them to do and tell them they did it and it was a good job, the more likely it is that they'll do it in the future without you. How many times am I going to have to tell Jenna that she's really good at keeping Hands to Self before she starts thinking in her mind, I'm good at Hands to Self? I don't know. It might be 1,000,000. But I'm going to keep doing it because it also makes my life easier to not have to deal with that problem. Behavioral momentum is all about building a string. The more you accumulate success with something, the more you don't want it to go away. Concept that works with all people. I like to think of this one like this. Dieting is really hard. I've worked my ass off, and I got 10 days in of sticking to this diet. And then someone comes and says, want pizza? And I'm thinking, I got 10 days in. I don't want to break the string. What if I have no days in? I'm going to go on a diet. Want pizza? Sure, I'll start my diet tomorrow. I got no string. I have to give Jenna a string that she doesn't want to break before she doesn't want to break a string. On her own, she won't do that. There's too many temptations. You guys keep working. I got to get some stuff out of my filing cabinet that for some reason is in the room next door. And when I go back here, what's Jenna thinking? Exactly. This opportunity may never come up again. I must take advantage of this. It's not my fault that she did that, but there should have been a way for me to think about, could I prevent it? So one, I want to get the stuff out of that filing cabinet before this period starts. And what if I forget? Then I've got to remain thinking about the environment. I'm going to need a helper. Jenna, you're really responsible. Would you help me bring this paper from that other room? The reason I'm doing this is because I know if I don't do that, there's a high likelihood of a problem, and I'm not going to let that happen. Here's my next thought on that. Assigning seats. How could I set Jenna and Aaron up not next to each other? Because they do tend to punch each other in the ear. I could come in here tomorrow and go, Jenna and Aaron, Aaron, move. You know what Aaron's going to say? Why me? She started it. She's the one that tried to hit me in the ear. And now we're going to do this whole thing. Let me just say this honestly. I lie to kids about this. Come on in. I put a bunch of names on the different desks. Find the desk you're in, and that's where you're sitting. Here's the lie. This is totally random. It's not. I thought out very carefully who should and should not be together, but you know what? Sometimes I make mistakes. I had no idea that these two was a bad idea. I will try on that first day, it's just one day, I will try not to move them because it ruins my perception of this being random. Sometimes I got no choice. What I'll do on this first day is I'll spend a lot of time walking around this table because that proximity prevents that. Here's what we do tomorrow. Hey, welcome, come on in. Find your name on the thing. Last night I flipped a bunch of coins and randomly moved people around. I've done that and I had people go, that's weird, the only thing different is she's sitting over there. And I go, I don't know. That's just a random way the coins flipped last night. I don't know. Now, you know how you keep kids going with this? You find a kid that never has a problem, and you very obviously move Carla. Or the next day, come on in. Last night I randomly moved some people. Let's see, who's different today? And the kids go, it's Carla, she's over there. Oh, yeah, randomly move people. If I keep doing that, eventually when I need to move a kid that really has a problem, if I can make that kid believe, this isn't about you. We do this all the time. It has nothing to do with you. What I have found is if the kid thinks they're moving randomly rather than I'm doing this to you, I have much fewer problems with it. So I make my kids believe that there's a very frequent random movement, which gives me a really, really credit card for moving kids when I want to and having them not know that's why we did it. Where should the teacher's desk be? There's no science, but I have a logic. One, you're probably not sitting at your desk a lot if you're maximizing probabilities. Two, you do sit at your desk sometimes. When you're at your desk, you should be able to see the eyeballs of every kid in your room with a simple turn of your head. And I've had people say, no, put the desk at the back so they don't know if you're looking. The whole point is I want them to know that I'm looking. I don't want to see the back of their head, I want to see their eyes. More importantly, I want them to see my eyes and know I'm looking. I don't want them wondering what I'm doing. I want them to raise their head barely and go, yep, he's looking. Then they're going to stop thinking about it. What about the kids? Let's look at some possibilities. Yellow stars equal problem behaviors. This is Rose, I like teaching in a room with rows. I like it because it can be independent, and I have lots of room to move and see individual kids. But there are some negative things with rows. I would like to be able to walk the room and touch the desk of every kid as I walk. In order to do that in a room with rows, I have to take a lot of steps. It's hard to see that red line there, but that red line allows me to touch the desk of every kid. The yellow lines that you can't see either are direct lines to the kids with problems. Two things to not do with those kids. One, this is probably the one I see most, how could I put all the kids with problems as far away from everyone as possible? We'll put kid A in the closet and kid B in the hall. And those kids need you more, not less. Second error I see is, who are all the kids with problems? Let's make this the problem table and we'll put them all here. That's a bad idea too. Spread them out, but make them all a very short or direct walk for you. That's what these yellow lines show. That kid's in the back, but if that kid's a direct line from my computer, I can see that kid and think I need to give that kid a reminder, or I just want to walk by, or I want to say thank you, or I want to do something, and I can just keep on teaching, and while I'm teaching, I don't need to pay any attention to where I'm walking, and I can end up right here. I don't want to put that kid in a place where I have to serpentine in to find them, because then it's more obvious, and I can't just be casual about it. But I like a lot of these kids toward the front, but nobody would come in and automatically know where those kids were. I don't want to stigmatize them. I once was in a classroom where the teacher had all those kids in the front row. There was like 3 or 4 of them, and she called it Skid Row. And she would threaten other kids. You better straighten up or I'll have you up in Skid Row with those guys. As if we're saying, you have to be with the other horrible people if you're going to act horrible. And I think what you're doing is letting kids know, I don't trust you, I don't think about you, you're going to be horrible. Try to create the room where you make everybody believe they're going to be successful. I hate this room. I can't get into the middle of this room. You can't walk sideways in this room because there are backpacks and chairs that take up the whole thing. This is what I do. Find a way to arrange your room so you can get into the middle. That allows me to be at most one person away from any kid. So if this is the table, I might not be able to get right there, but this is pretty close. But I'm going to assign seats and make sure the kids that I need to see the most aren't in that middle seat, because I can't get there. I'll put those kids where I can make a direct beeline to them. If that red line doesn't work because I can't get behind that, then I'm going to have to do this kind of a W thing and then go around the back. It's going to be more steps. I want less steps. That's kind of why I like this, less steps. Groupings of 4. When I go to schools at every level, this is probably the most common thing. All I do here is make a circle so I can walk a circle. When they're completely a group of 6 like that, it is hard to get in and around them. Spread it out. It creates a grouping in the middle, and I find that I can talk and just do my teaching without even thinking about it and walk around this part of the inner circle all the time and never even think about it. That's kind of what I like about the groupings like that I can just spin. I'm not seeing the kids on the outside. Every 3 or 4 laps, I might decide to walk around the outside. But I'm not going to sit kids in the back that I think need me more because I'm walking around the inside more. And that's something to consider. This is my favorite, because when I teach, like most people I'm sure, my head gets into what I'm teaching and how we're engaging, and I'm not thinking, take a lap, take a lap, take a lap. In reality, I wander randomly. I like this particular classroom arrangement because it allows me to wander randomly. If you took this table away, and these are the tables, I would just be in here wandering, but at any time, I decided I wanted to be at another table. It's about 4 steps, 3 to 4. 1, this is a longer ways than normal. This is more like 5. But I can be to anybody very quickly. That's why I like that one. Here's what doesn't work well with this one. The kids on the front of that circle have their back to me when they're sitting at the table. So this works better for group work than other things. But when I am doing instruction and want everybody to look, I've just taught a thing. When you hear that signal, you turn your chair and you face the teacher. And so I teach that, we practice it, it becomes part of our routine, and I can make that work. But I have to really be considerate of who I put where and how well they are following that rule. I don't want to be talking and have one of those kids that needs to be getting more clear instruction not looking at me. Last thing. We've been talking about using assigned seating and movement to prevent problems. What about if problems have already started? Then here's what I think you should do. Let's say that I'm making a lap around this room, and I go by this table and everything is fine. And I keep my lap going. And I'm talking to people, and I'm moving around, and I'm doing, and now when I get over here, that table is out of control. Do not yell across the room to that table. You guys are all working right now. You're all on task. You're not going to be on task when you hear this. Center table! Get busy! Everybody here right now is going, wonder what's going on at the center table. Nobody's working once I do that out loud. I'm going to start with eye contact and see if it works. Here's how I do eye contact. I take a step back, so I'm obviously looking at them, and I give them 4 seconds of direct eye contact. I call this the mom look. 1, 2, 3, 4. If they look at me and go, okay, and they get back to work, they put their heads down, they're still looking at you. Believe me. You do this. Good choice. I'll be right there. They know what that means. You don't yell across to them. You let them know you're coming. Then work your way back to them. If they don't get busy, then you do this. I am really impressed with this table. I see lots of people probably doing some of the best work we've seen this year. Really impressive. Great job of working. And now I'm here. And I'm hoping that that was enough, hearing me say that, but it might not have been, in which case I go back to 4 more seconds of the mom look, but at proximity. Four. Most of the time, proximity with the mom look will make everybody start pretending to work at least. When they get busy working, this is what you do. Good choice, guys. Keep that going. I'll be right back. Leave. You got them doing what you wanted. Leave, but come right back. Because if you don't leave, it becomes a challenge. So, what's your name?
Stacy.
Stacy has behavior problems, as you may know. And what will happen if I say, come over here, and then they start working, and I just keep standing here and staring? Stacy's eventually going to say something. She's going to say something rude to me because I'm challenging her. In her mind, you know, there's a bunch of people you could be looking at while you're staring at us, and she's going to say something, and it's going to set us off in a new direction. I'm aware of her, and I know what she's doing, but I'll be back. So I say this, that was a good choice. Keep that working. I'll be right back. Now I'm thinking to myself, how many seconds could I be gone and still be able to say something positive when I came back to this group? Again, 5 seconds is what I believe this group is good for. So I say, good choice. Keep that work going. I'll be right back and see how it's going. You guys doing all right? Like what I see? I'm going to be there in just a second. You guys are still working. I am impressed. Keep that up. And I move again. Maybe I'm gone 7 seconds next time, and then I come back by and I'm gone 15 seconds, and I'm going to build a string. But it's don't stand and stare, because kids who have a propensity for behavior problems escalate when you do that. That's what I'm trying to avoid, is that probability. Now, what if they never get back on task? I'm here, I'm staring, they're still not back on task. This requires a confrontation. What I want to do when I confront kids is I want to minimize the probability of escalation. When you confront, probabilities for escalation go up dramatically. So now I'm thinking, how do you use confrontation that lowers that? And whether you're dealing with one kid or a group, start with a question. Questions are less confrontational, if you use them right, than statements. I like to make them very genuine and make them so they're not defensive. Here would be an example. I really worry that sometimes when I give directions, I talk so fast that people don't understand them. It's a problem I have. I notice you guys haven't gotten started yet. I'm worried that I'm talking too fast so you don't get it. Does anybody here know what that first step is? Now, I've kind of given them an out here. If Stacy says, yeah, I do, I can go, exactly, oh, thanks, I'm glad you guys understood. Could you all show me working on number 1 to make sure that you got that? I'm going to walk over here and I'll be right back and I'll give you some, see how you're doing, but I appreciate you all working on 1. Got them going. I might not get them going with that, and it might end up me saying, here's what I need to see. I'm going to walk away from it. When I get back, I need to have seen that everybody did this. I'll be more and more explicit if I need to, if it's not going to work, just to give them these giant hints. What I want to avoid is being sarcastic. And this is something that I have to work on really hard. Because when I go address a table of adolescent boys who say stupid, smart-ass things to me, I have a great smart-ass comeback for your smart-ass comeback, which proves that I'm this much wittier than a 15-year-old juvenile delinquent. And it sets you up to say even something bigger and dumber. And I have to really think to bite my tongue from doing that. If the question you ask isn't legitimate and genuine, it'll make it worse. So here's a question that doesn't work. Hey, I got a question. Why is everyone working except for you? That's not really a question. That's an attack. And you will get escalation really quickly from Stacy and people like her when you use that kind of a sarcasm with people. So even if it's a question, if it's not genuine, it can come back on you like that. So I'm going to skip now to the final points. These are the things we've discussed today. 1, we, the adults that work in that school, have a huge impact on probabilities for success for kids. The things we do make a giant difference. We're important. 2, instruction is a science. We know what it needs to be, and it's incredibly important that we think of everything in an instructional context. 3, some things work better than other things. The things we've talked about today aren't sure things. They're probabilities. You get a better chance of a positive outcome by using these things. But that doesn't mean they're going to work with every kid or every time. And you're going to have to figure out the art of teaching, how to tweak those things to make them work. The science is pretty standard now. We know what it is. I don't think we encourage it correctly, but everybody's still got to figure out how to fit that science into their personality and how they teach. So those are the big ideas. In your handout, which is a little bit different from what I've done because I have obsessive compulsive disorder with my slides and change them all the time, there is my email address. If you have any questions about any of the things we've talked about, please don't hesitate to contact me. The cybers.com right there, there's a ton of video on there that's all free. If you want to see videos of different things, that's a good place to go. Are there any questions about any of the things we've covered this afternoon? All right, well, I want to thank you all for being here, and I hope you'd enjoyed your day today, and good luck for you in the future. Bye, thanks.